Martial arts in the modern world is very hard to give to people in the way we want, in a full physical, mental, and spiritual transformations.
He was sparring grown men before most kids learned to ride a bike.
Many other fighters now, they're only focusing just on that physical side.
He's a father of 3, training dads across the world to fight for their bodies, minds, and legacies.
People have to be willing to do something more than just do the exercise.
Empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless, like water.
This isn't about six-packs or punching bags. This is about rage, discipline, and the masculine crisis nobody wants to talk about.
You put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put in a teapot, it becomes the teapot.
If I get out of shape now, it's much easier for me to get into shape than it would be for some dad who's never been in shape, because my muscle literally has memory.
Be water, my friend.
If you're a dad or plan to be one, you can't afford to miss this episode.
Have you ever wondered what masculinity even is in the modern era? Are you ready to move beyond the macho bully or the soy boy archetypes? I'm Marc Azoulay, and this is the Men's Therapy Podcast. Together, we'll explore how neuroscience, Jungian psychology, and Buddhist philosophy can transform your life, your marriage, and your business. Are you ready to deep dive into the minds of men? Let's begin. Hello, and welcome back to the Men's Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Marc Azoulay, and I'm here with Aidan Lee. He runs FitRoots, which is a coaching outfit and training program that teaches dads to harness their fighting spirit. I'm really interested to have you on the show, Aidan, because I work with a ton of dads, a ton of divorced dads as well, and fitness and nutrition is often the first thing to go. So we need people like you out there that helps to make it accessible and keep it top of mind. So Aidan, welcome to the show.
Awesome. Mark, thank you for having me. It's great to be here. And I think, like you said, so many of us dads, even myself back in the day, we all need support. And the more we can get physically, mentally, and spiritually, the better.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think there's a thing with men that we're supposed to have it all figured out, and I think a lot of guys want to go into fatherhood feeling perfect as well. So it's great that you're kind of sharing the news and being a guide and mentor and coach for guys to be like, okay, you don't have to have it perfect, but let's help you, level up in a certain area so you don't lose your sense of self when you become a father.
Yeah, exactly. And I've been there as well. And I'm not ashamed to admit it, is that, I've never had my ducks all in a row. And, you go through peaks and troughs, and it's not, like I say, a perfect line. I just had my third son recently, and, things go out the window a little bit, but it's about how you get back on track.
Yeah. I mean, congratulations on that. Me and my wife are hoping to have kids soon. We're in the trying phase. So hopefully have a kid sometime next year or so. But yeah, let's just start with your personal story then. What got you started in this? You mentioned that you struggled with this as well. So walk us through how you began FitRoots. Yeah,
definitely. Well, I was very blessed and lucky to have my dad as one of my first, it's actually my very first martial arts instructor and teacher. So my late father, he taught me from the age of about 4. So I'm 33 now. So for the last 28 plus years, I've been in the martial arts and fitness and health worlds. And I was very lucky that he had his own martial arts school, which was one of the main ones in the area growing up. It's called Warlords Kickboxing Academy. So it's quite hardcore, quite old school, which is great. Has its pros and cons, a bit too much on the brain and head damage and things like that. But other than that, the aggression, the channeling of energy, the focus, the direction, that was great to be able to experience. And I was always around a lot of other men growing up. And even though we weren't necessarily verbally talking our issues out and stuff, we were using martial arts as a way to channel that energy positively in a good direction. So that's how I got started there. And then that was mostly in kickboxing. Then around sort of 12, 13, 14, I started exploring other martial arts as well, like boxing, Muay Thai, MMA, bits of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and things like that. And then when I got to college, I met college being just after high school, not American college. I met my Wing Chun Sifu, so that was great. And he really helped me bridge the gap between the physical and the mental or philosophical side of martial arts, which was really powerful. So I decided to go to uni, and at university I studied philosophy. And then I realized afterwards, all right, well, something is missing between the way modern martial arts is just practiced now, just as a purely physical battle or focus, and the mental and philosophical side, which was very deeply inherent within martial arts, whether it be from Buddhism or wherever else. And I thought, all right, well, I want to start something which will help people, but not just physically, but also mentally too. So that's how I started FitRoots. I started with a personal training studio for a few years, and then I thought something was missing again, went back to my roots of having a martial arts school like my father. And then just over 2 years ago, before my second child was born, me and my wife, because she co-ran it with me, we had a great kids program and adults program. We realized that something was missing there too. And it's that martial arts in the modern world is very hard to give to people in the way we want, in a full physical, mental, and spiritual transformation. So now, ironically, helping dads remotely, I'm actually able to get better results because they're more immersed and they're more deeply entrenched with the process. So it's funny how things work, but they've come full circle.
Yeah, there's a lot of great threads to pull on there. I want to start with the mental, emotional, and spiritual side that you were talking about. Can you say more about that? Because I agree. I think a lot of that gets missed in modern culture. You have like these like kickboxing classes, or like 7-minute abs or whatever, right? Where my understanding is that martial arts used to be like a full life training, right? You would go to a monastery, or you'd join a school, or a cabal or something, right? And you would practice all the time, and that would be your community. It's not really designed to be like a piecemeal turn on and turn off disposable thing.
Yeah, exactly. And do you have martial arts experience yourself, Mark? Or?
No, but I just studied Buddhism intensely for 3 years, and I do CrossFit. So I don't do like combat sports, but I do intensive exercise. Yeah.
Well, you've got something physical and something mental, so you balance it out somehow. No, that's great. Yeah, I think there's two elements to this. One is that, and I have to be careful because it can be slightly romanticized about this like super philosophical martial arts side of martial arts, but I think that it's not as pronounced as, we're sitting there all day and reading texts and scriptures and things like that. No, but it's like having a balance between having a great mental teacher as well as a great physical teacher. Now, the way I like to relate this is, if you look at people in popular culture, who's the first martial artist who comes to mind? The most famous first one? Yeah, exactly. For most people, many people would say someone like Bruce Lee. Now, was he the best martial artist ever? Maybe some would say so, some would say probably not. But what was so key about him was that he bridged the gap between the mental, the physical, and the spiritual in a way which captivated people. They related to him because they thought, actually, what he is experiencing and expressing is the way the human struggle is personifying itself in a way through his movements, through his emotion, through his action. So he captures people in a way that many other fighters now don't, because they're only focusing just on that physical side.
Yeah. Can you say a little about what you learned through your study of philosophy and through the mental side? Like, what did it add to the practice for you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, studying philosophy for me was a real eye opener. I dealt with it in little ways, but more in a top of mind kind of sense, not real deep or giving it much depth. And then what I realized is that relating it back to dads and people's fitness and health journeys and so on, of course, the way I train as well, I do believe in a very particular way of physical training and so on, and that has its own principles. But sometimes, as you know with what you do, Mark, so many people struggle to even get to the point of action, is that they need the foundational work before the action. So I could give you the best posture improvement, breathing, biomechanical exercises, but if you don't apply the habit and the actions towards that, it's almost irrelevant if it's the best thing. So what it really gave me is a framework to say is that this has to be a mental and a physical transformation. People have to be willing to change from the inside out. And it sounds very cliche, but they have to be willing to do something more than just do the exercise. And for those who do, no surprise, they get the best results. Those who just focus on the physical, yeah, they can still get great results, but I like to think they're like a bow and arrow. You can't use one without the other. You always need both.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it has to become like a person's identity to some extent. It has to really go all the way down to the core versus just like a fad or something that you're doing for, vanity or whatever, right? Because, there's so many mental challenges that I think come with, going far in martial arts, or going far really in anything. And I'm curious your experience of that, like the idea of, learning discipline, right? Or learning how to overcome fear, or learning how to, get back up when you get knocked down. Do you have some examples of, kind of the mental toughness that comes when you start to practice something intensely?
Oh, massively. There's so many, and I think you've got the right idea there, Mark, is that there's loads of examples, but first of all, I would just like to say is that most people now look at things in isolation, like you mentioned briefly about, I need to be more disciplined, I need to be more focused, or whatever it is. But there is actually a way where if you just look at yourself as a whole, like you mentioned about your identity, where if you fix that, your discipline, your focus, whatever other characteristic you feel you're lacking in, tends to bring itself up as well. So when the identity goes up a level, let's say from level 1.0 to 2.0, then so does your other lagging characteristics. And in terms of examples, there's so many. And I think really, of course, as dads, the earlier we can instill that in our children, the better. But I say we, like some of us guys listening to this, and even myself, in some ways, if you didn't have the chance, you have to put yourself back in the arena as if you would do for your own children. So, for example, I was very lucky to, I started sparring quite hard when I was young. I won't let my son or children do that now because I don't think it's the right thing, but I can still give the same principles. So when I was about, I started sparring, I think about 6, had my first competition around then. And then when I was about 9, 10 is when I really started sparring hard with the adults. And obviously they gave me a good beating at times. But again, I wouldn't propose that's a good thing to do in other ways. However, it taught me a lot that I'm not saying I would go back and change it now, because the grit, the perseverance, dealing with my emotions of getting hit, like I say, getting knocked down, getting back up again, I can't replace that. So now when I fail as an adult, I've got a deeply entrenched identity that failure is just another chance for me to get up and try again.
Yeah. Well, I love what you're saying, because I think young people, and I would say especially young men, like I think we are so physical when we're that age, that the lessons almost have to be that. There has to be some pain, like literal pain attached to it, right? Or literal fear attached to it. And I think, martial arts or sports or, whatever kind of activity, I think young men really need that, because we're not at that place where we can start doing emotional or mental or spiritual work until we've learned the lessons in the physical realm.
That's great. Is that something when you work with clients and stuff, you talk about this dynamic as well between the physical and the other work as well?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I find that guys have to, in their 20s, like prove themselves to themselves, right? Whatever it is, but do something that they think is hard and then beat it. Again, whether it's like a physical challenge or a fitness challenge or diet or whatever, right? Getting to a certain college, doesn't matter. But I think you got to prove yourself first. And then you're building the skills, which I know we'll dive into, that, really you need when you become a provider and when you become a parent. Because it gets like a little bit more amorphous, but it's the same kind of thing. You still need discipline, you still need habits, you still need consistency, you still need courage and strength. It's just more emotional and less physical, kind of the older you get.
That's super powerful. And I agree, as you say, it's more of like a universal principle which you can then apply to other things. And like you said, as men, whether it's young or old, we need to get into that arena. For example, even with my oldest child now, he's 4, and I could tell him until the cows come home, do this, don't do that. But sometimes he just needs to get that energy out so he doesn't do the thing I don't want him to do, or he does the thing I want him to do. And once he's, surprise, once the energy is out, then he's calmer, he's able to just be a bit more present and then act with more intention about what I'm actually asking him to do or previously asked him.
Yeah. Well, so let's dive into the dads. And I imagine there's 2 archetypes. You can obviously correct me because I know this is your area of expertise, but the 2 that I'm thinking of is like the guy that used to be really physically fit. Maybe he's like a high school or college athlete, and then he, gets married, has a kid, and then it all kind of falls away. You kind of get the dad bod thing, right? And then the other one I imagine is the guy who was never active, and is just trying to get into shape now that he has a kid. Would you agree with those? Those kind of 2 divisions?
Yeah, 100%. I think you know this quite well. You could almost take my my position. You've really hit the nail on the head. Yeah, there's really 2. And I find, especially with the formal group you mentioned about people who used to be fit and healthy, even though they might have, dad bod, beer belly now, whatever it is, they don't feel like their younger selves. From an identity perspective, they can still relate to that person who in their 20s and teenage years, whatever it is. But the latter person who has never been healthy or fit, it's definitely a bigger shift for them to get to where they want to be compared to the guy who used to be there on point. And look in the physical world, you also have examples like muscle memory. For example, if I get out of shape now, it's much easier for me to get into shape than it would be for some dad who's never been in shape, because my muscle literally has memory. It has the memory to go back to where it was and potentially further. So I'd apply the same principle.
Yeah. Well, so let's dig into those two archetypes more, right? I guess let's start with the former, right? The one who used to be an athlete and then let it go. If you can back it up a little bit, what causes that decline? How do they fall off,
Yeah, and before I had periods of where I didn't fall off myself. I guess I was only talking anecdotally and, from speaking with students and prospective students as well. But tying it all together, because I've also had periods where I've fallen off. And what I've realized is that those guys who fall off, and then they had never felt like they could get back, something else took priority. And usually it's really two things or a combination of them: family, work. Usually family and or work, usually both of those. And unfortunately, most of us, even myself at times when I fell off, we use that as an excuse, because that responsibility of family and work weighs greater in their minds than taking half an hour, 1 hour, whatever it is, to put some time into myself or into themselves. So in their head, they're justifying, saying, well, it's okay, I'm not fit, I'm not healthy, I'm not an example because I can pay the bills, or, I work hard, can't you see I'm working hard? And how could I possibly do this plus that? So for them, even though they had it before, a lot of them still rely on that previous identity physically, but now financially, professionally, familiarly, that's their focus. But they'll still say, I can lift this way or I can do that. But, it's a bit of a slippery slope, because I've said that too. I thought, there was a time where I trained, it was not long after I finished uni. So I've been training at that point for about 17 years or so. I thought, I can step back a little bit, but yeah, sure, I can still throw the punch, throw the kick, do the move, run, but you feel the lack of integrity in yourself when you know that, I'm getting rusty, I might pull something here. I'm not setting an example. So does that explain that archetype or that person?
It does, yeah. And I guess I want to dive into some of the risks that those people have. And again, my kind of like anecdotal experience being in a CrossFit gym, there's a lot of parents. We're not like a super competitive gym, but we have a lot of older folks and then a ton of like young parents. And I see this archetype come in where they come in and they're like, used to be jacked, and they still, are in good shape, don't get me wrong, but then they get injured usually in the first 3 to 6 months, because I think they push themselves too hard and then they never come back, because I think that they get that kind of like that humbling of like, oh man, I'm not the guy I used to be. And I have to imagine that mentally, emotionally, that's world shattering, to have that. Do you notice that with the guys you work with? Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And in some ways, it's much harder. You have to rein those guys in more than the guys who've never been fit, because the guys who've never been fit, they don't have anything to measure against, apart from their current or former selves who are more out of shape. So if they start training, unless they get injured, they're pretty much better all the time. But the guy who's been in shape is always going to compare to how he was in his prime. So what is really important, especially as you mentioned about the injuries there, Mark, is that so many guys go in with the wrong type of training, they go in with the wrong mentality, and then they end up in the wrong position. And you should really readdress your goal, or your health fitness goal, based upon your current posture, your current biomechanics, your current ability, your current external and internal health. So there are so many variables that it's not as easy to say, I'm just going to go as hard as I used to, because that's where they end up, in that cycle of injury starting again, or just giving up and then going back to how things were, when they lost it.
Well, and do you provide those kind of assessments? Because I can see that being incredibly valuable, of like giving guys that like really clear mirror of like, hey, here's where you're at, here's what your goals are. They might not like it to begin with, but yeah, that's something that you offer to your clients.
Yeah, definitely. There's quite a few, like some of the more like lifestyle kind of things. We do a lifestyle assessment, but something more very analytical and very clear. We do a biomechanics assessment. So we assess their posture, their movement patterns, how they walk, how they run, and then how that would feed into the kind of training they should do. So not that it's impossible to injure themselves, but that's much less likely. And then anything that comes up means that everything else can be tailored in their training program accordingly. But yeah, you're right. Some people really, myself included, at times we do need to be humbled a little bit and say, all right, well, let's just focus on this first before we go up there. And once we've nailed this, then we can move there.
Yeah. Tell me more about humility, maybe from like a philosophical lens, because that was a big part of my journey is learning humility. I was a real like grandiose kind of entitled dick for a while, and I had to be humbled physically in many ways and then learn and practice humility. So, what's your take on that? And it's kind of a vague question, but yeah, talk about humility.
I'll answer how I can, but I'll be interested to hear from your perspective as well. I think, especially as guys, it could be relative to some other guy meaningless, but relative to yourself, it could be you feel like your life, you're on top of the world or something like that. And it could just be a brief moment and you have a moment of stupidity, which then, brings you down a few notches. And what I find is that it's important to not think too much of yourself, whether it be to be too serious or to think you're too good looking, you're too rich, or you're too fit, whatever it is. It's just realize that we're not as grand as sometimes we may think we are. And therefore not to say that we shouldn't have confidence and pride. Of course, those are very important things to have, but have them in certain dosage, that it doesn't affect your reputation, or it doesn't affect how other people perceive you negatively and so on. And to tie this into something practical is I think we all need a practice which does that for us. Now, as a practice, you could say, hopefully when you experience it as well, Mark, for example, fatherhood is very humbling. It does teach you to sometimes let your emotions calm down and just listen to what your children are saying when they're, especially, for example, now I've got 3 and there's different directions, they're fighting and there's all sorts going on, trying to work or whatever it is. If you have to manage life very differently. So I think with more humility, something I'm working on too, is that your expectations change. And it's not that you should reduce or eliminate them, but it's that you should manage them of your own expectations, but also of others as well.
If you're enjoying the podcast so far, please hit the subscribe button and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us to reach more men and inspire them to become the best versions of themselves. Thank you for your support. And now back to the show. Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's really well said. I makes me think there's like a, Marcus Aurelius quote from Meditations, Stoic philosophy, where he says like, the soil doesn't lie. And I think men need that. We need, again, whether it's martial arts or it's like literally gardening, or I don't know, craftsmanship, something where like you have a very clear mirror is the way I talk about it with the guys I work with, is because I think most guys, we value reality and we value honesty and we value truth. So being in situations where there is a hierarchy, in martial arts, for instance, right? Or weightlifting where there's a number of like, I can bench X amount, like we really need those clear numbers so that we can track improvement, and that we can kind of figure out where we fit in. Because I think a lot of us, if we don't have that, we live in this delusion, we live in this delusion of where we stand, where we stand as a human or where we stand as a man.
Yeah. And those are great examples. And it's tough, sometimes I speak to guys and yeah, it can be not for me, I'm not a very uncomfortable person, but for some, it can be a little bit uncomfortable when you have to say like, well, look, maybe you're not as fit as you think you are, and that's okay. Nothing wrong with that, but it's about where we go from here, not about where you are now. But to know where you are, like I said, you need to actually look in the mirror, not look through it or look in some other direction.
Right. Yeah. Or not just like draw on the mirror, right? Like what you want to see.
This is how
yeah. Draw a 6-pack on there,
Yeah.
Be like, yeah, it's all good. Yeah. So kind of to go back to those archetypes, right? Like I was the second one, right? So like I was like a nerd, Dungeons and Dragons nerd growing up, right? So like for me, getting fit has been a newer thing. I think I've like played around with it in my 20s and stuff, doing like kind of bro lifting, but nothing that was like really real, or really educated. It wasn't until working with trainers or starting on CrossFit that I started really taking it seriously and doing, all the other stuff, right? Including, diet and meditation and all those other things to kind of have that holistic view. But the hardest part was the beginning, was like, getting on a treadmill and being like, oh my God, I like cannot run at all, or like, benching the bar and being like, this is tiring, like I'm like really weak and like out of shape. And that was difficult. I mean, it took me, no exaggeration, I would say 2 or 3 years just to get over that, to get over like feeling embarrassed or get over feeling that I didn't belong in like, the group of like fit dudes or whatever.
Wow. Fair play for the honesty as well. I'll be curious to understand, because I think others would benefit as well, as what made you, because that's quite a long time. Most people would have given up in 2 to 3 months, let alone 2 to 3 years. What made you stick with it and like just say, I'm going to do this, I'm not quitting?
For sure. I think a lot of it was, again, because like I guess I came from like the mental emotional side first, and a lot of it was this idea of like, I need to have a full cup so I can then give to other people, because I would notice that I would get burnt out at the end of my days, right? I'd be like eating unhealthily. I would be at a weight that I wasn't comfortable with. It started bleeding into my life, and I was really painfully aware of that, and through the work of therapists and coaches, it was like, I don't want to live a life where I just feel disgusting, frankly, or I feel undesirable or whatever it is. And then the thing that motivates me now is I moved to like a mountain town, and I have to like do mountain shit. Like I gotta like cut down trees and like plow and like snow shovel and like get up at god awful early in the morning and do physical stuff. And like for the first time in my life, I have a reason to work out, again, because I know some guys, like, I'm sure you were sparring or training for tournaments. Some guys are running marathons or rock climbing. Like that never really worked for me. It's like literally my life. Like I don't want to be tired in my life. And I imagine fatherhood is probably a very similar thing, where it's like, I don't want to be exhausted around my kid, not be able to pick them up or throw them around or play with them,
Yeah. That's actually a really great reason, because, life is a much more enduring factor than, for example, if I was to continue fighting, and not that I don't fight anymore. So you see, after that, you need something. You need something like yourself. And that's the greatest way, because if you can tie it to your day-to-day life, then you need it for your day-to-day life, living in a wilderness, a wild area like you do. And that's the best way. And it's actually, as how humans, we're meant to live more like that. So you've got it right.
Yeah. That was a big motivator, is like, I just need it at some point, right? Plus, CrossFit gym, which I imagine is very similar to martial arts, is like, there's a huge community aspect. We moved here, about 3 years ago, and I'm meeting other people. Like I said, I'm meeting new parents. Like it's a great way. Like it's more than just the exercise, right? It's like the social, the mental, the emotional.
Yeah, exactly. And once you realize it's more than that, and with the work you do as well, Mark, us men, we need something. We need something, and we need someone. We need something to focus on. We need someone to help us and to help them as well. It's not just about take, we need to give, because we don't feel with that sense of purpose if we can't give to someone as well. And whether it's martial arts, as once you're the student, then you become the teacher and you teach someone else. It's a normal, natural cycle that more of us need to go down.
Yeah. So let me bring you back to, that second archetype, right? The guy that was never in shape. How do you help someone like that? Or what do you notice some of the patterns or trends with that individual?
Definitely. So I think I referenced it earlier, is that sometimes that kind of person who's never been in shape, they seem to be more on extremes. Sometimes they're really hard to get out of that identity, because going back to the identity point of view, is that they're very entrenched in that identity. Or they're so fed up of who they are, who they were, that they're so sick of it that they're ready to change. And of course, the ones who are sick of it in some ways are better, because they are actually ready and willing to do the work. But the ones who are so stuck, sometimes they stay stuck. And how we help them? Well, it really ties back to what I mentioned before, is that if I can get something to click in their mind, that this is the chance, or almost like the last chance they have, not in a fatal, ultimatum kind of way, but almost like tricking the mind to say, well, if I make this my last chance, then maybe I will actually do it. Because it has to be a little bit different as well. Because it's not just about, like I said, I might believe I have the best training methodology or this or that, which, fair enough, I believe it's better than this or that, but it doesn't matter if they don't get there. Because I have, unfortunately, over the years of experience, have had, some guys who don't make it, they don't make it through because it's not 100% success rate, because it takes two to tango. However, if we can get them to that point where they say, well, I'm fed up, I'm ready to change, and they can go from this extreme to almost to the other one, then it's almost a guarantee. But if they don't get past that part, then that's the hard part.
Yeah, I like that you bring that up, and I want to just kind of zoom in on that a little bit, because it's something that I talk about in my work too with men. Is like, how do I say this? I say like dark side motivations are sometimes what's required, like being motivated from disgust, right? Or from anger, or from being, like you said, exasperated, fed up, down the line, it can turn to these kind of more like therapy, pure motivations, like I'm doing it for my family, or I value my health, or a spiritual purpose, right? But I think for a lot of guys, it is that kind of like, this is horrible and I need to fight my way out of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's really powerful. Now, I think when I was reaching out to you, Mark, I think I looked on your website, and one of the images reminded me of your really cool website, by the way, but some of the images on there, they're very like a little bit dark, but also like very graphic. And it's that kind of thing. It's not to say that the monsters, the dragons are inherently bad, because they exist. It's like, in the various Eastern philosophies, you can't have the light without the dark, and vice versa, and the good without the bad. You need these things. And, a lot of stuff in, especially modern society, tells you, especially for men, aggression is bad, but it's not inherently bad. It is if I pick up a knife and I go and commit stabbings and crimes like there is everywhere, and that's aggression. But if I take it and I use it positively, and I spar, do some pad work, do some bag work, training with a bunch of guys who are just trying to get better, where we use our aggression, much better that it's used there than in some nasty way. So it's not inherently bad. It's just, right, how can we use that in a normal way?
Yeah. Tell me more about that balance, because I'm getting that impression from you that I get from a number of martial arts masters, where it's like the most lethal fucking people are also the chillest in the world. Because I think you have that balance, right? You have an outlet for that aggression and that violence that all men have inside of us, right? We don't have to sugarcoat that. But yeah, I think it creates like a more balanced human overall.
Yeah, I would like to think so. And of course, I hope to try and be an example of that. But, if there are some, for example, some fighters who are just very aggressive. But again, it's because they're only focusing on the physical. They're not what I would call a complete martial artist. They're focusing on just the martial side and just becoming the baddest physical guy on the planet, or whatever their aim is. But the guys who are truly balanced, they have it all. They have the physical strength, but they have the mental calmness as well. But they're ready to attack, to defend if they need to, but they won't start it. They won't initiate it. And it's like, if, especially in at the moment, I'm in England, moving from here soon, but in the UK, there's not so much as before, but there's still a fairly big drinking culture. And if you go out and see the people who are starting the fights, it's not usually the calm martial artist or kind of guy who's used his energy and training that day. It's the guys who are fed up with their lives, and it ends up coming out in a negative way.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think when guys are in that like narrow band, right, where they like have to be good and perfect all the time and they can't be aggressive, it can snap like really easily. Whereas, yeah, what I hear you saying is like when you expand that, right, and you like let yourself be aggressive, you can also let yourself be more calm and present.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a great way of putting it. And it essentially is let yourself be a man. Despite what everyone tells you nowadays is, or what is being bombarded to you as a man, be careful what you listen to, and think about, well, what does it mean to be a man? Would you make your ancestors proud with how you are physically, mentally, and spiritually? And if you wouldn't, then something has to change.
I agree 100%, right? It's like, what I tell my dudes is like, humans, and human men specifically, are like the apex predator of planet Earth, right? Like we have dominated this planet, and we have to remember that. And it's like you said, it's channeling that into something that is, constructive and safe and, rewarding. But denying that and pretending that we're not the apex predator of the planet is just crazy. we are one of the most aggressive animals out there.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, and because you speak to a lot of guys like this as well, what do you see happens when people suppress that too much and they don't
it comes out sideways, right? I mean, I think for a lot of guys, you mentioned drinking. I think for a lot of guys, it's, substance use or porn addiction or gambling or gaming or whatever, right? They find something where they can just kind of shut it down, and every once in a while something comes out, God forbid they like hit their partner or they get into a fight on the street or they crash their car. But for the most part, I think they're trying to really deny it over and over again, And then I think for other guys that aren't using substance, they're the kind of the nice guy where they just like deny, don't do it. But then they live this life of desperation. I think they feel very lonely. I think they feel very used. They have a lot of resentment. Like they're really actually pissed off all the time, even though they're pretending that everything is fine. Like I think there's like a volcano inside of a lot of men that needs positive outlets like martial arts to be able to express that and work through those feelings instead of just pretending that they're not there.
Yeah, exactly. And, because like you mentioned, I think it sounds like you have this balance as that, especially in the self-help therapy kind of space, especially for men, there seems to be like this approach where, okay, you can go real soft and just talk about everything and just talk, or you can just go real hard and just be physical. There's a balance, I think, again, which can be had. It's about balance. It's how can we bridge the gap between both worlds and make the feelings tangible physically and vice versa, so you can actually solve it and not just get stuck in talking or get stuck in being only physical.
Punching everybody, right? Yeah, it's like, yeah, I think a lot of therapists, my industry, I think fails dudes because we try to turn men into women. I think we try to turn them into like big emotional softies that are really sensitive and caring. And that stuff is important, but I think there's a masculine way of doing it, right? Masculine nurturance is very different than, feminine nurturance. So I want to kind of throw that back at you, right? The idea of fatherhood, like how would you just start talking about that or define that? What does masculine love and leadership and mentorship look like, and how do you help guys kind of develop that?
Yeah, I love that you said that, Mark. So I didn't actually know where you kind of sat on that spectrum of the kind of making men women.
So yeah, I'm interested in making men into men. Making men into better men, not into women.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we're here for. So yeah, when it comes to fatherhood, I mean, it's still a big learning curve for me. My oldest is still young, even though I've got 3 days. There's only a 2-year gap between them. But I'll give you an example. My wife is very level-headed. She's not emotional and not what many would call a typical woman, but she's not therefore masculine. She's still very feminine, which I love. And however, when it comes to our children and say disciplining them, especially my oldest, he's quite, should we say, he's very fiery, to say the least. So, I will be more harsh. I think it's in my nature, even though I feel, generally speaking, compared to most guys, I'm fairly calm. But at the same time, if there's a boundary, then I don't want it to be crossed too much. Or if it is crossed, then we need to figure out what are the repercussions, how we're going to manage this. So in a sentence, I'm more focused on managing those boundaries when it gets to that point. And she's doing a lot of things up to that, which helps to manage before he gets to the boundary, and does it still happen? Of course he does. He still gets there and goes past it. But to directly go back to your question as well, is that I think it does make you more soft, being a father, of course, because it's natural. If you may have heard the stats about how after a man has a child, his testosterone is at one of the lowest it will be. And it makes sense physiologically, evolutionary, whatever you believe in, it does make sense that we do need a little bit more softness. And even if that comes in the form of patience or not just being lovey-dovey, maybe just patience is what we need a bit more of, then that helps. And, even nowadays, I would say I certainly need a bit more of it. But can I say that I should go too far down that way? No. I think not just my son, I've also got a girl as well, I've got a daughter. They need me to be a man so he can look up to me and say, I want to be like daddy. And she can look up to me and say, I want someone like my dad to be my husband one day. And I think if I can fulfill those two roles, or those two positions for each of them, and any other kids going forwards, then that's my job done.
Yeah, can you say more about those? Like what tactics or strategies you use when parenting a male versus a female? Because I think it is different. And of course, every kid is different. But I do think, like you said, it's like one is like you're being that mentor role model for them. And the other one is being a mentor and role model for their partner, future, relationship partner.
Yeah, definitely. I think a very clear example is, for example, with my son, he needs more rough and tumble, hard play fighting. And even when he's older, that it will just become more formal training. So like my dad was able to do for me, maybe I don't remember from being super young, but when I was getting older, the training got more serious and the lessons got more serious and so on and so forth. So that's the kind of route. I know that's just one example, but I'll take with my son. My daughter, I want her to do martial arts too, and she does do a little bit. But just in general, not just martial arts, even outside of that, I'm just a little bit softer with her, a little bit more, it's not a particular tactic or whatever, but it's just more of an overarching level of softness with her because she appreciates it more. There have been times where I've shown less patience than I should have, and I've been a bit harder, more direct with her, like I am with a little bit more with my son. And I know it's only anecdotal and only my experience, but she doesn't resonate with it as much. She goes straight to being sad, whereas he will go straight to being maybe a little bit angry, a little bit, I'm going to get you back. So it's a different energy. So I need to make sure I'm seeing what I'm seeing. Do I fight fire with fire or fire with water?
Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you wanted to open up, but you were afraid that it wouldn't be taken well? You ask yourself, what's the point? Nothing's going to change anyway. So you do what you always do. You push it down, numb out the pain with a drink, a night out, or pornography. I've been there myself, and I know that men lack the outlets for emotional expression, which is why I founded Men's Therapy Online, a healing hub for men's mental health. If you've been knocked on your ass or just crave meaningful connection, join Men's Therapy Online, a community of men who just get it. We offer individual therapy, men's groups, and powerful retreats, all led by licensed therapists. At Men's Therapy Online, we will help you to get back on your feet and take your life to the next level. Start your journey today at menstherapy.online.
Yeah, and that's really well said. I'm curious, do you have training programs for fathers and sons? Helping them to like bring the kids on the training journey as well?
Yeah, I've had actually a couple of people asking, and I don't have a specific one, but what happens is some of the guys get their kids involved, which is awesome, and they train with them because I train with my son sometimes, and that's amazing. And soon I'm moving abroad again, and where we're going to, the setup there is I can bring him to the gym and stuff like that, which is great. So it was one of his favorite things to do whilst we were there. So with this specific program, it's actually something I'm thinking of doing, but I just need to figure out how exactly I'm going to structure it, because I don't want it to take away from the student, as in, i.e. the dad who's coming to get the result, but also make it work for the kids too, depending on their age and stuff like that. So it's definitely a great idea though.
Yeah, I think that would be awesome. We talked about, again, like masculine love, and my definition of it, it's like, the male like sets the challenge, which is hard enough. And I'm curious how you kind of do this, right? Because if it's too challenging, right, the guy's going to be like, well, fuck you, like I can't do this, and just give up. Right. And if it's too easy, they're going to feel patronized and just be like, well, you don't know me, and like I can do this, and then give up. So you got to set that perfect level of challenge and then coach the person up with that. I think a lot of like traditional masculinity that didn't work is that like, the parent would set the challenge and they'd be like, well, you go figure it out. Right. They wouldn't do any coaching. They wouldn't help the kid get any better. It would just be like, kind of left to the wolves. So yeah, I guess the question is like, one, what do you think about that idea? And two, how do you enact that in the coaching and fatherhood that you do?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's absolutely valid, Mark. And I'll just go straight to the fatherhood example because it made me think of my son. For example, sometimes I'll ask him to do something. Now, if I don't give him very clear instructions, but two, very clear guidance, and I'm talking about outside of instructions, more like the secondary details, right? Not do step 1, step 2, step 3. Oh, you have to consider X and consider Y and also think about Z too. They need the structure and the instructions. And that makes a big difference, because depending on the task, and like you said about the complexity of the task, if it's simple enough and he's ready for it, he can do it. I'd just say, go and do this. But if it's more complex, he's less experienced, and it requires more thinking, more creativity, then more guidance, more coaching, more mentoring needs to be given. And same, sure, my son is young, but same to the dads or anyone I work with as a student. So, all right, if I say to you, go for a 20-minute walk, it's not really much more to say. Yeah, just do that. just go do that. Make sure you schedule a time. When's it going to work? And I go through we figure out their current. I do this exercise where I figure out my students' current schedule and their ideal schedule, and we see where the gaps are, and we plug them and reorganize their time. Because a lot of guys say, "Oh, actually, I don't have the time to do this." When in reality, everyone has the same time, as we know. It's cliche, but it's how do we use it, and where can we find some extra pockets of time that could be spent to spend. Because I only ask for 30, 45 minutes of exercise, and I find for most guys that's enough. So going back to the dads now part of this is, well, we need to apply this same level of instruction depending on the complexity of the task. Walking, like we said, we figure out the time, when you do it, the habit, we track it. So we say, all right, over the week, you've gone for your walks 67% of the time. Or what happened in this other 33% that made you miss it? So each week, we review that. So there's a bunch of different data based on their habits, their adherence, their training and so on, that gives me the picture I need to say, well, based on this and your schedule and your goals and your feedback and various other data, here's how we fix it. And we definitely need to really reconsider the approach, especially with things like AI and, of course, just the internet before that. Anyone can find a fitness plan in 2 seconds. It's not the problem. It's one, is it tailored to you? Is it going to help you definitely get to your goals? And 2, 3, are you going to stick to it? Do you have the accountability? And then 4, where's the coaching? Where's the direct feedback? And this is why most people fail. Come end of January, they're just back to where they started with their New Year's resolutions. So we need a system and we need structure.
Yeah, and like you said, the accountability in the relationship is critical. I mean, I noticed that, again, working with the trainer out of COVID and then into CrossFit, like just having someone that can correct form on the fly, someone that I feel like I owe in some way, right? There's a relationship and a connection there. I don't want to look like a, weakling in front of them or something, right? I want to try, even that, the coach just look at you during a workout and it's like, okay, shit, fucking get back on the horse, I think that's critical. And I think things like AI they're like a simulation of that. And there's so many people that can, like you said, you can download anything, you can follow whoever you want on Instagram or YouTube, but without that real, chunky piece, I think it's just a lot of people watching it as entertainment, not really making the changes that they need in their lives.
Yeah, it's like almost like a mental masturbation. It's not like a real, there's not the real deal. You need to get down to it. And as you said, it's like because you didn't have that experience, I guess, because you didn't do sports and fitness stuff. I imagine for you it was a big change when you had someone looking at what you were doing and telling you, wow, okay, here's what you need to do. Right,
exactly. And it felt like, again, in the beginning, embarrassing, right? But overall, now that my ego is checked, it feels a lot better, right? It's like, okay, this is they're not critiquing me, they're not making fun of me. I had to go through all of that because, again, I'm kind of that type 2 individual where I had a lot of ego defenses around it. But now it's like, okay, this is what I'm signing up for, and this is what's helping.
Yeah, and once you realize that as well, I think there's a strong, almost causation is, I found, for example, the guys who are most open to feedback, to change, naturally are the ones who get the best results. Because if you say, oh no, I'm running correctly, or I am throwing that punch or that technique correctly, all right, that's cool, then you don't need me, or you don't need a coach, you carry on. But I know, for example, after I've been doing martial arts as an example, and especially kickboxing for over 28 years, can my jab get better? Of course it can. So when someone who knows what they're doing tells me, oh, you should try this, you should do that, I'm going to at least try it. I'm going to at least have a go. Maybe I'll take their suggestion on board later, maybe not. But I guess my point is that most people most dads, most guys who are trying to get fit, or trying to not just get fit and healthy, but stay there too, they haven't been there and done that. So we all need to just accept a little bit of help and guidance.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I do think like to turn up the heat on that, I think like men need hierarchy, and I think we feel belonging when we know we're at the hierarchy. Even if we're at near the bottom, as long as we know we're there and there's enough like mutual respect, obviously no bullying or hazing or whatever, right? If there's like mutual respect, it's like, it feels really good, I think it feels very natural for a lot of guys to feel like we're somewhere and that we have the pathway, which I know you provide, like to climb the ladder if we want to.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's really important. And most people will say, oh, that's demeaning or this or that, but it's actually the opposite. It's liberating, because if you look at any, whether it's religion, and in this sense, martial arts gets compared to religion quite a lot, rightly or wrongly, but any philosophically religious or big religious movement, they all have hierarchy. And why is it? Because we need someone to look up to, sometimes literally, but sometimes just figuratively. I need someone who's walked the path, someone who can show me the way. It's as simple as that. We need experience and wisdom passed down to us. We can't pass the wisdom to ourselves.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's really, really eloquent. So I want to give you a chance to talk more about your program, because we've talked about it in bits and pieces, but can you just let the listeners know like what's involved, what kind of exercises, what kind of plans, like what it would look like if someone were to sign up with you?
Yeah, great question. Well, I mentioned about the martial arts side, but really what I found works, especially because I work remotely, and it just happens to be my specialty is kickboxing as well. So we basically blend 3 main disciplines. So one is kickboxing, one is functional strength training, and then the other is the philosophy and the mental side of it. And of course, we really focus on the nutrition and habit change and this and that as well. But what I found is that, just like we talked about hierarchy of, in society, I've also found there's a hierarchy in terms of what should be focused on in terms of training, programming, and so on and so forth. Now, I know this may sound contradictory, because I said a lot of the mental stuff needs to get in place. But what I like to do is put training as number one priority, because if they can crack that habit, everything comes downstream from there. So what this means in reality is, for example, say someone can train 5 times next week because they followed the training, but maybe they didn't follow the nutrition principles exactly as I have outlined them. Now, what I prefer about this approach than if someone just did the nutrition first is that, have you ever just felt, I just really crave a salad? With no reason. I'm not saying salad is the healthiest thing, but it's just what people typically associate it with it. No, you don't usually. But I bet after you get back from CrossFit, I need something to build, I need something to build my muscles, but I need to feed myself energy. So at that point, you're much less likely to go, I'm going to go and get the fast food, the takeaway. So the quicker the training gets involved, and the quicker you master that, the quicker the nutrition, the sleep, the stress, even the mental parts, everything comes into play. And most people will say, nutrition, getting in shape is 80% nutrition and stuff like that, but I completely disagree. I'm not saying it's not important, of course it is, but I think it's about the hierarchy. Nutrition comes into place, but we look at the training, we look at your light balance, so how much sunlight you get, how that relates to your artificial light, how we can reduce all of those things and how they affect your hormones. And there's really so much to it, but what I like to say is that a lot of things, and people will do things like cookie cutter, but you need something which is for you. And especially if you struggle with, getting in shape and keeping up with it, more and more customization is needed based upon how successful you have been with your own health and fitness goals.
Yeah, I think that's totally true. I mean, I've noticed that with me and a number of my clients, it's like the healthier you get, the more kind of sensitive you are in a way, and that you feel that junk food way more than you used to, because you have a point of comparison. Like, there's like that gap where or you feel the alcohol more, you feel all these negative habits more, and they do kind of just fade away over time, because the system, I think, as a whole is starting to process and getting healthier. And there's a reason to not eat the junk food. It's like, oh yeah, I want to feel like ready for my workout tomorrow morning, or I don't want to go drinking on a weekend because I don't want to be hungover because I know I got to go train on Monday. Like, it kind of all starts to interlink that way.
Yeah, exactly. And soon, the quicker you get to that point, your priorities shift, and you start to say, well, all right, well, is that drink or going out and having 10 drinks, could I just have one or could I have two? And as you say, that now if I was to drink compared to how I used to drink some years ago, there's no way I could drink that much. Impossible. Or even with other drugs or whatever it is that you have a tolerance level which changes based upon, as you said, how the system functions. An inefficient system or a system used to some toxicity, in whichever form that is, will embrace the toxicity more. But an efficient system will refuse toxicity as much as it can.
Yeah, because it wants to be running clean, right? I mean, that's just kind of the idea. So, I know we have a number of dads that listen. I think I mentioned before that divorced dads is kind of a subset of our audience too. Do you have any tips or tricks or something that they could start right away to get the ball rolling if they're feeling really motivated by this conversation?
Yeah, it definitely. And just so I get the right tip across, and when you say in relation to divorce or maybe even single dads as well, what do you find is that their biggest challenge compared to, say, guys who aren't divorced?
I think it's time, so I think a lot of the guys, because they're a single parent, they don't have nearly as much time. I think a lot of these guys, and that's why they're talking with me, are also dealing with a lot of emotional barriers, a lot of emotional shame, post-divorce. So they're in that kind of down part in their life. So investing in themselves can feel selfish, or it can feel they don't deserve it or something, So I think there is often this kind of it's very much get back on your feet kind of thing.
Yeah, because even the very act or process of divorce is a massive, like a massive KO punch, and you get really knocked down, and you've got to build yourself back up from the ground. So a lot of, because I've also worked with some guys, some students who are single dads or divorced, and again, I think you're right. I just wanted to make sure we're on the same page. At that time and their beliefs or set of beliefs as the biggest limiting factors. So just to address the time one, assuming some of these guys are also primarily looking after the kids, then we touched on it earlier, but it's getting the kids involved. And, unless they're even if they're super young, my daughter and son started training with me at 1. Did they do much? No, but and was it a little bit distracting to me when I was training? Did I get the best workouts in? No, not compared to if I did it myself. But for example, I was saying earlier, I'm moving abroad again soon. Just for context, I'm going back to Sri Lanka, and it's in the tropics. It's outside the gym, which is lovely. But after about a year or so of my son doing that, eventually he got the drill. He joined in. So actually I ended up being able to get to a point where I was able to train just as hard as I would have without him, but he knew the drill. So he knew he had to come, he had to do whatever he could, and then when he needed a rest, he can rest. So to tie it back to the dads is that you've got to get them involved. If that's it's childcare, whatever your barrier is, which I imagine that is the biggest one, and from those who I've worked with who are in a similar situation, you have to get them involved, because you doing something is better than nothing. If you sit and mope around and feel sorry for yourself and I've got this and that, it's tough, of course, but better than doing nothing.
Right. Yeah. Well, and it models health to your kid. Kind of what you were talking about earlier, right? It's if you're sitting moping around drinking beers on the couch, again, maybe there's a time and place for that, but if that's more often than not, that's who your kid's going to turn into, or who your kid's going to marry. It's seeing a healthy, fit, strong, confident man is the best thing you can do for your kids, especially at a young age. Because like you said, you can't really talk to them, but they are watching you like a hawk. I mean, they are modeling everything after you.
Yeah, 100%. And one of the biggest things I say is pretty much like that is you have to lead your family by example. And it doesn't matter if you're, in that sense, if you're married, if you're divorced, whatever, like you say, your kids are still watching. And it's so cliche, but as you were saying, is that, with kids that they watch what you do more than what you say all the time. And even my son now, he's so cheeky at 4. He'll say, well, why is so-and-so drinking that drink? Isn't that toxic? And, why are they eating this or that? Isn't that toxic? And he's got this thing about toxic in his head, but it's because we've talked about that to him. These are the things we don't have. These are the things we have. So he was actually doing this at 3, just after just as he turned 3, so very young. And, most people wouldn't think that, a 3-year-old would talk about those things. But it's only because he would ask us and we talked to him about it. We educated him. We got him involved in the process. So the involvement is what really brings the family together, divorced or not. You can still have that bond and you can still show them the way. Because I've also had, he's actually one of my previous students now, but he was telling me that, because he's divorced and he had quite a messy divorce and stuff, but when his kid stays with him, he teaches him, he trains with him, gets him to eat well, but then unfortunately when he goes to the mum, then just gives him whatever he wants, and unfortunately that he's only young, but the kids then ended up overweight. But, I was saying to him, well, you can't control what she does, but you can give him that. When you've got your 50% with him, you can give him the best 50% possible, so that when he's old enough to realize, then hopefully he walks down the right path.
Yeah, 100%, right? It's like planting those seeds early. And he might not like it, right? I mean, I think kids, they're going to want the candy over the, kale salad. But over time, they realize, oh, wow, I actually feel better, when I'm at dad's house. Or I feel, we do fun stuff. We go outside, we climb, we play, we don't just sit and watch TV. Over time, I think that it starts to flick in them a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you say, something has to click. And when it clicks, then all logic, rationale is not needed anymore. It's just, I know, we're on the same page, and you almost don't even have to talk. You can just look at each other and you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Aidan, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Can you let people know where they can find you online if they want to follow you or take advantage of some of your services?
Thank you, Mark. And yeah, likewise, it's been great. So you can reach out, anyone listening, to me via my website, which is FitRoots, FITROOTS, .co.uk or .com. It still comes through. And I'm most active on LinkedIn. So you can just search me up, or maybe you can link up in the show notes. My name is Aidan Lee, and you'll find me on there. And if you want to join a newsletter that I give out every Monday, basically it's a simple, less than 5-minute read on how you can fight the dad bod and build a lean body and unstoppable energy in less than 5 minutes, then I think I've got the link over to Mark, and yeah, you guys can sign up there.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks again for being on the show. All that stuff will be in the show notes. So yeah, check it out, guys. Sign up for that newsletter. It's great. It's a good, just little punch to motivation and good accountability structure. We were talking about a bit during the show to be oh yeah, I am interested in this. I do have an intention. Get that snowball rolling. I know it's really hard personally to go from rest to go from movement, but I think, working with someone like Aidan and getting in touch with his program, getting newsletter can be really helpful just to get that momentum going.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate your words, and it's been a pleasure to be here, and I hope it's helped your listeners.
Yeah, likewise. And listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next week, another episode of the Men's Therapy Podcast. If you enjoyed this, do all the social stuff, share, subscribe, send to somebody, send to a dad that, wants to fight their dad bod, or someone that's been complaining about it for a while but struggling to take action. Send Aidan over to them. Send this episode, share it. We're doing our work to kind of debunk the stigma of mental health and get more men getting healthier, happier, and overall being better fathers, husbands, and men. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week on another episode. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. And don't forget to visit menstherapy.online to learn more about the work that we are doing to support and inspire men. Until next time, keep moving forward.